3 weeks without power changed everything. Hurricane Ian completely changed the way I think about backup power, fuel, water, and long-term preparedness. Hey everyone, Ruby here from Ruby's Adventures Unplugged. Today we're going to take a look at this 11,000 watt tri-fuel inverter generator from Gidrox. We're going to set it up, connect it to my home propane system, hook it up to my home generator connection, and then put some real load on it using my RV and electric vehicle. Because after living through Hurricane Ian, reliability matters a whole lot more to me than specs on paper. A few years ago, during Hurricane Ian, I experienced an 11-foot storm surge at my home in Cape Coral, Florida. The surge eventually rose right up to the doors of the house. My house was built above code standards for hurricanes, and it still suffered significant damage. Parts of the roof were torn apart, and I eventually had to put a massive tarp over the house just to keep rain from coming inside. Many older homes nearby were completely destroyed. Roads were blocked with debris, boats, flooding, trees, and downed power lines. Utility crews spent weeks rebuilding damaged infrastructure. Before the storm, I stocked up on bottled water, food, and around 50 gallons of gasoline for my smaller generator. And thankfully I did, because there were no stores open nearby for about the first week afterward. Nothing within 10 miles, nothing within 20 miles. And many businesses stayed closed much longer than that. Some never reopened at all. Even if stores had been open, many roads were completely blocked and difficult to travel. We also didn't have running city water for about a week. And when the water system finally did come back, it still wasn't safe to drink. One of the biggest lessons I learned after Hurricane Ian was that fuel becomes one of the biggest problems during a disaster. But even using the generator sparingly, those 50 gallons of gasoline only lasted about a week. During a Florida hurricane outage, power stops being about convenience. Refrigeration becomes critical. Freezers become critical. Even just cooling part of the house enough to sleep at night becomes important. Another thing I learned is that relying completely on gasoline creates long-term problems. Before hurricanes, everybody rushes to gas stations to try to fill fuel cans ahead of the storm, and stations often run out of gas before the hurricane even arrives. Then afterward, fuel shortages can continue for days. Even if gasoline sits too long inside a generator, the carburetor can gum up and create problems later. Even stored gasoline eventually goes bad if you don't use it. So after Ian, I wanted something more sustainable for long-term outages. That's why I decided to upgrade to a tri-fuel inverter generator. This house already has propane because it powers my stove and water heater. So I had a plumber install a dedicated propane connection specifically for generator use. And unlike gasoline, propane doesn't go bad sitting in storage. I'm also using a 15-foot generator cord, which lets me keep the generator positioned further away from my garage door. One thing I liked right away is that this generator comes mostly pre-assembled. You basically just need to add the oil and connect the battery. It also comes with quite a few accessories, including a remote control, a propane hose, plugs and adapters, tools, and even a magnetic dipstick oil plug. For my setup, I'm using a separate propane hose because my house already has a dedicated propane connection installed. This is also a fully enclosed inverter generator with sound deadening material inside the housing, so it should run much quieter than a traditional open frame generator. The front panel is really well laid out. You've got 4 standard 120 volt outlets, a 30 amp outlet, and a full 50 amp outlet. The display screen up front shows all the generator information while running, and the fuel gauge is located on top directly on the fuel tank. It also has less than 3% THD for sensitive electronics, a floating neutral, and a built-in carbon monoxide detector with automatic shutdown. All right, so let's go fire this thing up on propane. All right, let's get this thing fired up. For an 11,000 watt generator, that's surprisingly quiet. After living with generators for weeks during long outages, noise becomes something you notice very quickly. So I decided to compare it against my Firman T07573 tri-fuel generator, since they're actually pretty similar in physical size. The difference was immediately noticeable. For the first measurement, I was kneeling about 1 foot in front of the generators. This generator measured around 80 decibels at that distance. Then I measured again while standing further away. At around 5 feet away, it measured roughly 75 decibels. And at around 10 feet away, it was about 70 decibels. The Firman open frame generator was much louder. At the same 1 foot measurement distance, the Firman measured around 96 decibels. At around 5 feet away, it was around 86 decibels. And at around 10 feet away, it was still around 80 decibels. And in person, the difference sounds even larger than the numbers suggest. Now, let's see what happens when we start putting some real load on this thing. I'm going to use my Tesla charger because it gives me a very controlled adjustable load. Since this generator is rated for around 8,100 running watts on propane, we expected the overload protection would probably trip somewhere around 33 or 34 amps. So I started slowly increasing the Tesla charging current in stages. I started at 20 amps, then increased it 5 amps at a time up to 35 amps. After that, I increased it 2 amps at a time. At 20 amps, the generator was sitting around 241 volts. And even as the load increased, the voltage regulation stayed surprisingly stable. By the time we reached 40 amps, which is the maximum my Tesla home charger will pull, the generator was still holding around 238 volts. Now, watts equals volts times amps. The Tesla was pulling roughly 9,500 watts on propane, which is well above the advertised continuous propane rating, and even above the gasoline running watt rating. We fully expected the overload protection to trip around the advertised limit, and it just kept running. Eventually, after about 5 minutes at full load, the overload protection finally kicked in. Now, obviously, I wouldn't recommend intentionally overloading a generator continuously like this, but I was genuinely impressed by how much overload capacity this thing had, especially considering it was about 93 degrees outside during the test. One really interesting thing was that my Firman generator would not properly charge the Tesla at all. The Tesla charger would connect, but it would not take a charge. The Gidrox generator worked properly because it uses a floating neutral design, where the neutral and ground are separated. The Firman uses a bonded neutral design, where the neutral and ground are tied together internally. So that was actually a pretty interesting real-world difference between these two generators that I was not expecting. One unexpected thing I learned after Hurricane Ian was that having an electric vehicle actually became useful during fuel shortages. Since gasoline was difficult to find in some areas, I could still charge the vehicle using generator power. After living through Hurricane Ian, backup power stopped being a luxury for me. It became essential. And the biggest lesson I learned is that long-term outages create problems most people never think about ahead of time. Fuel, water, refrigeration, heat, road access, supplies, everything becomes harder very quickly. That's why I really like the flexibility of a tri-fuel generator setup like this, especially having access to propane directly from the house. Hopefully this video gives you some ideas for your own hurricane preparation setup before storm season arrives. Make sure you check the description below for links to the generator, cords, propane hose, and the other parts and equipment used in this video. I'll also link my original Hurricane Ian video if you want to see what we actually experienced during and after the storm. I hope you enjoyed this video, so make sure you like and subscribe, and remember, stay charged.